Today's guest is someone who has redefined how we think about growth, leadership, and transformation. Whitney Johnson is the CEO and co-founder of Disruption Advisors, a world-class leadership development firm that works with Fortune 500 companies like Kraft Heinz, Morgan Stanley, and Amazon to build high-performing teams. She was ranked among the top 10 management thinkers worldwide by Thinkers 50 in 2021 and was recently honored with the 2025 ATD Talent Development Thought Leader Award. She's an award-winning author, keynote speaker, and executive coach who has spent her career helping leaders and organizations harness the power of growth. Her latest book, Smart Growth: How to Grow Your People to Grow Your Company, was a Wall Street Journal bestseller and offers a practical framework for navigating the S-curve of learning, a model that helps us understand how individuals and teams develop, innovate, and thrive. Wall Street to the boardroom, Whitney has seen firsthand what it takes to embrace disruption, lead to new S-curves, and create environments where people and organizations flourish. Whitney, it's an honor to have you here today. Welcome to the conversation.
Clint, I'm delighted to be in conversation with you.
So I like to think of all of my guests as superheroes. And in your book, those, I guess, are metamorphs. You say the metamorphs are the superheroes. And all superheroes have an origin story. So what's yours? How'd you get here today?
Besides how I woke up today, you mean like
What
life, how did I get here today?
What led you on this journey to, yes.
Okay. What led me on this journey? Well, let's see. I grew up in San Jose, California. But was born in Madrid, Spain. So I've always thought of myself as Spanish, even though I'm not, but it figures, sort of into my story. Studied music in college and then went to Brigham Young University. Graduated, actually went and lived in Latin America as a missionary for a year and a half when I was 21. So again, the Spanish piece. But then I got married, graduated, moved with my husband to New York City. And that's where things started to get very interesting. So here he was getting his PhD at Columbia. I'm a music major. I am a female. I still am. I have very little confidence. And I need to put food on the table because my husband is in school. So I get the only job that I actually can get, which is as a secretary. And I was working on Wall Street for a stockbroker, 1345 Avenue of the Americas, which is on 6th Avenue, right next to the Hilton Hotel. And I would go to work every day and have this experience of, filling orders for the stockbrokers that I worked with. But I had this bullpen across from me where there were some young, up-and-coming masters of the universe is probably the best way to describe it, trying to open up brokerage accounts. And at that point in time, we didn't do E-Trade. They would call people and say, hey, do you want to open up an account and buy this stock? I remember they wanted to get people to buy WMX, Waste Management. And so in this sort of hard sell kind of fraternity type environment, they would say things like, it doesn't take a rocket scientist to know that this is a great stock pick. Throw down your pom-poms and get in the game. And at first I was really offended by that because I was a cheerleader in high school. But then I really had this moment, this epiphany of, wait a second, my husband's getting a PhD and this is going to take a really long time. And I'm responsible for putting food on the table. And I could make X or I could make 10X. And when am I going to throw down my pom-poms? And when am I going to get in the game? And so I started taking business courses at night, accounting, finance, economics. I had a boss who believed in me, and that gave me an opportunity to move from being a secretary to investment banking. And if you know financial services at all, if you ever saw Working Girl, which is a very old film at this point, you would know that that was basically my story, as I was able to move into that professional track. And I would not have known to call it this then, but that was really the beginning of me disrupting myself in terms of what I thought was possible. I had this vague notion of I'll graduate from college, again, music. I didn't really have a plan of what I was going to do with music. It was sort of the, 18th, 19th century liberal arts idea. And yet I started to think, wait, I could do something different. I could be something different. And so I disrupted my mindset, my sense of what was possible. And that allowed me to go from banking and eventually became an equity research analyst and was award-winning and had the wonderful privilege, and I can talk more about this if it's helpful, to connect with Clayton Christensen at Harvard Business School and co-found the Disruptive Innovation Fund with him. But then along the way, I had this another aha that I was actually a lot more interested in the momentum of people than I was of stocks. And so I found myself increasingly focused on that. And so in 2012, I wrote an article in Harvard Business Review called Disrupt Yourself, and really applying the theory of disruptive innovation that Clayton Christensen's so well known for in The Innovator's Dilemma to people, and that your company can't disrupt unless your people do. And so over the last 12 years, I've written books on this topic and built the business into what I have today, of really having the privilege of working with organizations, helping them go from A to B by implementing this framework of personal disruption.
I think you mentioned in the book that you actually use that HBR article as a premise to start kind of seed the book, right?
Yeah. 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 I mean, it was so exciting because, here I am working with Clayton and doing the investing, but also having this opportunity to get to see him speaking and sharing his ideas and really getting steeped in disruption. But then again, having that aha, and partly from my own experience, because I had been working on Wall Street, I had read The Innovator's Dilemma. I had gone to my manager and said, hey, I think I want to do something different. I want to not be an equity analyst anymore. And they looked at me and they said, we like you right where you are. They didn't say exactly that, but pretty close. And I thought to myself, in fact, I can even remember like where on the page I was reading The Innovator's Dilemma, and I realized if I don't disrupt myself and take control of my life, I'm never going to do whatever it is I think I was meant to do on this planet. Like, again, you have this vague notion. And that was when I made the decision to leave Wall Street, become an entrepreneur, but then eventually connected with Clayton about 2 years later and then got to work with him.
So for those that are unfamiliar, what is the S-curve of learning and why do you find it so powerful?
Oh, I love the S-curve. So some of you are going to be familiar with it. It's sometimes referred to as an adoption curve or a change curve. It was popularized by Everett Rogers back in the 1960s, and he used it to understand how do groups change over time. We were using it at the Disruptive Innovation Fund with Clayton to understand how quickly an innovation would be adopted. But then I had this aha, and you're going to sense this pattern, right? Because I was applying the theory of disruption to individuals. I thought, wait a second, I think that the S-curve can help us understand what growth looks like for an individual, and perhaps more importantly, what it feels like. And so very, very simply, I think of it in 3 parts. There's the launch point, there's the sweet spot, and there's mastery. And what happens is that every time you start something new, so start a new job, start a new project, start a new hobby, even start a relationship, you're at the launch point of that S-curve, and your brain is running this predictive model of what is it going to take for me to go from the bottom of that curve to the top of that curve. And at the bottom of the curve, as you're running this predictive model, most of your predictions are inaccurate. So dopamine, the chemical messenger of delight, it de-delights, it drops. So you're thrilled that you're doing this new thing, but you're also having this experience of, this feels overwhelming and a little bit scary. And I thought it was a good idea to take this job, but now I'm not so sure. And you may even feel like an imposter. And so at the launch point, the growth feels very slow, even though mathematically it's at its fastest when you're at the launch point, but it's not apparent. So it feels like a slog. So that's the first part of that curve, that launch point. But once you understand that you're going to have all those feelings when you're doing new things, you can go, I'm uncomfortable. I'm supposed to feel uncomfortable, situation normal. So that's the launch point. But then you put in the effort, you tip into that sweet spot that Malcolm Gladwell popularized. This is a steep, sleek back of the curve. Now your predictive model, it's increasingly accurate. And so you have these dopamine spikes. You have these emotional upside surprises. It feels exhilarating. You feel like you're exactly where you're supposed to be. And growth in the sweet spot is fast and it feels fast. So that's the middle part of the curve. Then the third part of the curve, which is a very interesting place, because now you're on the top, you're what I call mastery. And mastery doesn't necessarily mean you're the world's foremost expert in chess. It just means you did what you came to do. I wanted to learn 5 songs on the ukulele. I wanted to go to 20 countries globally, and you did. But here's what happens here. Because your model, your predictive model is now working, it's debugged, you're getting a little bit of dopamine, but not a lot. And our brains need dopamine. So now you have a dilemma, because on the one hand, you really like being on top of that S-curve, master of all you survey. You're an expert. Everybody comes to you. But on the other hand, your brain needs more dopamine. And so you have this experience of, if I stay here, I will stop growing and I will start dying. This plateau that I'm on will become a precipice. You understand instinctively, intuitively that learning is the oxygen of human growth, that there's more for you to do on the planet. And so you make the decision to jump to a new S curve. Now, here's what I will tell you. Sometimes you don't make that decision because you're a chicken. But if that happens, do you know what happens? The universe gives you a nudge and it pushes you off that curve, or it pushes you back down the curve, because growth is our default setting. So that's the curve. Slow and then fast and slow. And it's a very simple model to help you understand what growth looks like and what it feels like. And it can help you navigate the emotional terrain of doing anything new.
I think that just answered my next question, which is, why do you believe growth is not just optional, but essential for leaders and teams? And it sounds like it's because it's the oxygen. And if you don't do anything, you're going to push it off anyway.
Yes. In fact, Clint, it's so interesting. I've never done a study on this, and I never will, but I'll just keep hypothesizing and keep collecting anecdotal evidence. I actually have this hypothesis. Many people have lost a job or laid off at one point or another, including myself. And I have this hypothesis that you lose a job because you knew that it was time for you to do something new. Like, you could feel it. It was time for you to do something new, or it wasn't the right job for you. And you didn't quite have the gumption and the ability to jump. And so the universe gave you that nudge, and it tipped you, and it disrupted you for you, so that you could disrupt yourself and move on with your life.
I like that. So I can just be lazy and life will push me where I need to go. Just kidding.
Well, there's a little bit of that.
So how can I recognize where I'm at or where my team is at on their individual curves?
Okay, let's start with you. And then that'll allow you to think through your team. So a couple of markers that you can use. Number one is you can start with time, right? So if you're using the 10,000 hour rule, I mean to say rule. So you're probably going to go launch point somewhere between 0 and maybe 12 months. Sweet spot, if you're working 40 hours a week, sweet spot, maybe 1.5 to 3 years, and then mastery get to, after 3 years. Now that assumes that nothing has changed, right? No major new projects, not a new manager, not a new role. So that's a good marker. The way you also are going to know from an emotional standpoint is launch pointers are going to have the experience of feeling overwhelmed and frustrated and feeling like they can't ask for help, and sometimes getting performative because they want everybody to think they know what they're doing, as opposed to being in this place of learning. And just that feeling of, you go home from work and you're like, I don't know if I should have done this. And this is the place where, when you're having dinner with a friend, they'll talk about the angst that they're experiencing of their new job. So launch point's pretty easy to tell. Sweet spot's also easy to tell, except for you miss it. Because this is the place, because everything is working, our brain isn't like, there's nothing out of sync, because it's hard, but it's not too hard. And it's easy, but not too easy. So when you go to dinner with your friends, they don't necessarily talk about the sweet spot, because they're like, work is great. Let's talk about something else. Mastery is an interesting place. And one of the ways that you know mastery, again, time and role is a first indicator. If you find yourself starting to feel less motivated than you were, if you find yourself starting to dial it in, if you find yourself saying, that's not how we do it here, if you find yourself saying, I feel like there's more for me to do, and even though functionally I'm getting paid what I need to get paid, but emotionally I feel like this isn't doing the job for me anymore, it's probably time for you to do something new. Now, that's for you internally. And when we look at our S curve, we always talk about the internal experience. It's like the perceived rate of exertion. But here's where the challenge comes in. I might think I'm in mastery, ready to do something new. And you, my manager, are like, Whitney, you are doing a great job. You're in the sweet spot. So now we've got to disconnect, because you're saying I'm in the sweet spot and there's still some more things I need to do before I get to mastery, and it's time for me to do something new. And I'm saying, no, I'm in mastery. It's time for me to do something new. Now, a couple of things here. You can use this S curve as a really good artifact to have that conversation with your team. You say you're in mastery, tell me why you're in mastery. What 3 S curves are you on that, your portfolio that makes up this curve? And tell me why you feel like you're in mastery on each one of these. Then I can talk you through what I'm seeing and see if we can come to a meeting of the minds. And I promise you that when you do get to mastery, I'll give you a new opportunity. But here's the important clincher piece of this. Because emotions are the data that predict behavior. If I tell you I'm in mastery and you think I'm in the sweet spot and I'm a high performer and you don't want to lose me and you know that the emotions are going to predict the behavior, what's going to determine my behavior? Where I think I am or where you, my manager, think I am?
Where you think you are.
Yeah. So as a manager, it's really important to not only know where you are, but also to understand, yes, I've got a good sense of where my people are, but you need to know where they think they are.
That's tough. Yeah. Because then if you know there's more for them to go, but they're probably going to leave. So you have to let them start the new S curve even you don't want them to.
Yeah. Or have that conversation or rebalance the portfolio. So if you think about with your team, so I remember a few years ago, I was coaching someone at a large CPG company, and she was absolutely at the top of the S curve. So she was in the treasury function, and they needed her to stay in that role. Like they needed her. So they said, okay, we're going to have you keep doing part of this job because we need you as an org. But we're going to rebalance or load balance your portfolio and give you an opportunity where you've got some launch points in your portfolio. So we're going to move you to another part of the org, take on some new roles so that overall her portfolio stayed in the sweet spot. And because they did that, she ended up staying in that organization probably 2 years longer than she might have otherwise had they not been willing to rebalance that portfolio.
You've mentioned the portfolio concept a couple of times, and I think I heard the number 3 in one of those. Is that the number of S curves you would have at any one point in time, or can it be 6? Should it only be 2? I mean, is there a limit?
Yeah, there is a limit. Okay. So here's how I'm triangulating to what I think the right number is, or the optimal number is. If you look at project management, which I think you know something about.
A little bit, yeah.
Okay. What's the optimal number of projects, Clint?
Just like you're going to say, it depends. Depends on the size of the project, the complexity. Yeah.
But in general, 3 to 4?
3 or 4, yeah.
3 to 4. Okay. You also know in our brains, we can, from a neuroscience perspective, we can only hold like 3 or 4 ideas sort of at the same time.
Right.
So the optimal number is to say, and using a standard bell curve distribution as well, to say you probably want to have 3 major curves at any given time, 2 where you're in the sweet spot, 1 at the launch point, 1 in mastery. So what might that look like? We can take it from a life perspective right now, because that's sometimes interesting to do, is to say to yourself, okay, so I want to have a couple where I feel like I know what I'm doing. But if you are in a situation where, for example, you've been in the same job for 10 years, no new boss, you've lived in the same town for 10 years, you've never moved anywhere for 10 years, you are probably over-indexed at the top of that curve. And as a consequence, what did we say earlier? Learning is the oxygen of human growth. You're probably stagnating as a human being and probably as an employee at the same time. By the same token, if you've just gotten married, you've just started a new job, you've just had a baby, you've just moved to a new town, that's a lot of launch points. And so what you're trying to do is say, okay, I want to feel like I know what I'm doing at work, and I feel like I am really comfortable in the house and the city that I live in. Great, now I can get married. Or great, now I can have a baby. So allows you to think about continually rebalancing. And if you feel off kilter, you know why. You probably have too many launch points. And if you're feeling this sense of ennui of like, wow, life is not very interesting right now, work isn't very interesting right now, it's probably because you have too many mastery places in your portfolio. And again, mastery does not mean you're the world's foremost expert. It's, I did what I came to do here, whatever that is.
One of the things I enjoy about your book was all the stories you tell. I love stories. And a couple that I want to chat about right now. One was how you use Mike Rowe as an example of the explorer. So we talked about what the explorer phase kind of is part of
Yeah.
the launch is part of the launch phase,
Yeah.
but what is explorer exactly, and why was Mike such a good example of that?
Yeah. Okay. So the explorer phase is so what I did is I broke down the S curve into 6 different pieces. So the launch point had the explorer and the collector. So the explorer phase is you're on a brand new S curve, and maybe you chose to be on this S curve, and maybe you were kicked onto this new S curve. And so you've got this time where if you think about being on this desert island, you have to decide, do I want to stay here, or am I going to be, do I started to think of Gilligan's Island? Sorry. So a little bit of a brain jump. Okay. Do I want to stay here, or does this curve make sense for me, or do I need to go somewhere else? And so, in fact, I'm going to pull out the book because I don't remember all the things off my top of my head. So the questions that you can ask yourself, and then I'll talk about micro in just a second. When you're at the launch point of a curve and saying, does this curve make sense? Do I want to stay here or not? You can ask yourself questions like, do I think that this is achievable? Whatever this is, this role, this project, etc. And when I say, do you think it's achievable? I mean, do you believe that you can believe that it's achievable, which I think is really important. Because sometimes self-limiting beliefs kick in, but do you believe that you could get to the point where you believe that you can do it? Number 2, is it easy to test? So are there ways that you can get lots of feedback in this particular curve to figure out, is the product market fit there, for example? Number 3 is it familiar yet novel? So meaning, I was just in Australia recently, and I thought part of the reason why I like Australia so much is that there's a lot of familiarity. They speak English, but there's just enough novelty, right? It's a different part of the world. They speak differently. There's a different accent. There's a different sort of piece of it. So it's exciting to be in Australia. Does it fit my identity of who I want to be? So it may not be my identity right now. And I talked a little bit like religion. Like if you're going to change religions, that's a big identity shift. Is that something you want to do? Is that a price that you're willing to pay for that? Which goes to, is the reward worth the cost? And does it align with my values? And finally, is this aligning with my why? Now, micro.
I love
Why
this
is
one.
he is such a fascinating guy. If you haven't already, go listen to the podcast interview that I did with him. So here's a guy, Dirty Jobs. For those of your listeners who are not familiar, he is a guy who started out in high school. He wanted to be an actor. He had job after job after job after job. And the reason he's such a great example of an explorer is most people don't like to start new things. They like to start new things and they get really competent at them and then do something new. Well, his training was he was an actor, he was an opera singer, and Dirty Jobs, every single episode, he was doing something new. He was cleaning sewers, he was slaughtering pigs. All those jobs that none of us want to do. I will tell you, this is a bit of a digression. After listening to him, interviewing him, reading his book, my respect for the trades was transformed because of his work.
Yeah.
Anyway, example of an explorer is he has made a career out of being at the launch point of the curve. He's very good at it. He likes it. He models it for us, which probably means that he will live a very, very full life because he's never going to get stale.
That's true. And I think I remember reading that he early on, he was part of Deadly Catch, and then he just became the narrator instead of going on the boat over and over again.
He was a part of Daily Catch. Yeah. In fact, and you're just reminding me. So one other thing I will tell, actually, let me just look this up really fast. Oh, and he wanted to be a carpenter like his grandfather.
Yeah.
And his grandfather was like, you're not good at this. Like you're not good. You need to do something else.
Way to go, Grandpa. Be honest.
Yeah. So he was an on-air apprentice to pig farmers, roadkill cleaners, hot tar roofers, sewer inspectors, all in service of the question, what would the world look like if no one did this job? And anyway, he just fascinating guy. Here's the thing I would also say for all of your listeners and for you and for me, because I need to remind myself of this every day. One of the reasons that or one thing that can happen to us as we get older is we can insulate ourselves from ever doing anything new. We can insulate ourselves from ever navigating any launch points. We really can. And so one of the things that, whereas when you're young, you get very good at navigating launch points because you're forced to, because you're continually disrupted. The difference for us as we get older is we have to use our agency and our autonomy to require ourselves to navigate new things so that we don't lose that muscle.
Right. You talk about that in the book where the kids are, children are just like that. They're constantly learning and failing and learning and failing. And as adults, we kind of tend to avoid the failure if we can.
Mm-hmm.
Another story you told in the section was about, I'm going to probably butcher the name and I apologize to this person in advance, but Marco Tricorca.
Oh, Marco Tricocci. Marco Tricocci.
Okay.
Like, remember the singer Jim Croce?
Yeah.
So it's Tricocci.
Okay.
Yeah.
So he was CIO at the time of the Four Seasons, and his first boss there was then CFO John Davison. Mm-hmm. And this is basically a point to all the leaders out there: do this instead of what you normally would do.
Yeah.
And when he first got hired on, what most leaders would probably do is say, hit the ground running. I want to get everything as fast as possible. But instead, his boss did something quite different.
Yeah. Oh, I like
his
how you're
boss
setting that.
Said,
are you going to you share? You go.
Well, he just basically said, I want you to take your time, meet the people, get to know the people, and then create a plan of what you need to go do, which is just such a gift.
Right. And because of that, so he was there, I think, well over a decade. I think he was there closer to 14 years. He's now at Sunrise living in Washington, D.C., but he was there for 14 years and he did this massive, massive IT transformation. And if you think about why that was possible, obviously he had the technical skills, but that foundation that his boss asked him and required him to lay is he helped him make sure he had relationships with all of the stakeholders. So that's part of being at the launch point of a curve, is build relationships with all of your stakeholders so that when you ask them to do that thing called change that no one wants to do, you have the moral authority and the relationship, the relational context to make it feel safe enough that they want to change and they're willing to change, and they can and you can understand how to talk to them about the change so that it feels like something that they actually want to do.
Yeah, that was just such a gift because most bosses are the opposite. They say, get it done. You're already behind schedule and just hit the ground running, And so it was a really nice, refreshing approach that he took. The term that you mentioned in the book that I also found interesting was premature cognitive commitment. So just in case you don't, have to memorize the book, it's basically a tendency to cling to familiar assumptions even when new facts come to light.
Yeah.
And as I was reading about that, I thought that kind of, not that I want to get into politics, but it certainly explains how the two camps can be so different. No matter what news comes in, they see it from their perspective and they don't change their minds.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And, there are different ways to refer to that. There also can be, confirmation bias or anchoring bias of and it was fascinating to build on that. I remember a few years ago, and I think it might've been after I'd written this book, interviewing Annie Duke, who who's a poker player. She was an award-winning poker player. And she talked about how we all talk about how we hear something and then we decide if we're going to believe it or not, but that's actually not how it works. We hear something and then we believe it, and then we have to decide what we're going to do with it. And so it's part of the reason why the, ages of 0 to 3 are so powerful, because everything you hear, you believe. It could be complete bunk, a complete lie, but you believe it anyway. And so we're between that and then this idea of confirmation bias and premature cognitive commitment. It is very, very difficult for us to disagree with what we already believe.
Because then we would have been wrong.
We would be wrong. And you know why we don't like being wrong? You know why we don't like being wrong, right?
No, please tell me.
We're addicted to being right. We are addicted to being right. And here's why. So this is research from Judith Glaser. So every time you argue with someone and win, your brain floods with dopamine and adrenaline. You're like, I am the victor. I am so smart. And so if you argue with someone and win, then the next time you disagree with someone, what are you going to do? You're going to argue so you can win again because you can get dopamine. And so we are addicted to being right. It feels terrible for us to be wrong.
It does. I'll agree. I was going to talk more about a little bit feeling terrible later when I talk about feedback, because I don't like feedback, but you think
we can do that now. Do you want to do it now?
Yeah. So, one of my flaws is I don't like to receive feedback, negative feedback. Right. And it's because I tend to fixate on it. I can get a review from a class I've done, and there could be 10, you were the best thing I've ever seen, and then one that was like not positive, and I focus on
Mhm.
the one.
Yep.
But you say feedback is necessary, and even if it's comes across as being negative, you still need it.
Yeah. Well, again, there is a reason why we fixate on that negative feedback. I mean, from an evolutionary perspective, our brain needs to scan for threats, right? And so when we hear something that is negative, that's a threat to our identity. There's also really interesting work that had been done by a professor at West Point at one point. I think it was called The Psychology of Combat. And basically, what he said, he described it, and I can't remember his name off the top of my head, but that whenever someone gives us feedback or attacks us, it's actually, it's like we're being emotionally killed dead. Like it is very, very difficult for us as human beings. That being said, we do know that so we'll flip it. So it also makes it very uncomfortable for us to give feedback, right? Because we don't want to kill people dead. And yet, a couple of stories. Number one, I was thinking the other day about a high school English teacher that I had, who I am still very grateful to her. Her name was Mrs. Erickson. Actually, it wasn't high school, it was 8th grade. And I was thinking about why I admire her so much. And I realized it wasn't because she didn't care if I liked her or not. She didn't care if any of us liked her. She just wanted us to be good writers. And I was also thinking about the other day, I'm writing my next book, and I have this editor. Her name is Julie Berry. She has a new book. She's a young adult author published. It's called If Looks Could Kill. And when she reads my writing, she eviscerates it. I mean, there is really, truly no other word other than eviscerating. But you know what's so amazing, Clint? I don't mind. And it's not because I've got tough skin. There's something about the relationship where she's able to give feedback and I feel seen and validated. She likes me, she respects me, and so I can hear it. And so back to your point, my guess is you said you don't like feedback, but I'm going to disagree with you. I'm going to tell you you're wrong because I'm addicted to being right.
Because you're right, exactly.
I'm going to disagree with you because my guess is that you've gotten lots and lots and lots of feedback in your life. It's just that you don't remember the positive feedback because you felt seen by them. And so it didn't feel like a shot across the bow to your identity. So
Yeah.
what say you to that thought?
I agree. I think it's the negative feedback that tends to stick in my head. Just like you talk to professional coaches, they'll tell you that they remember the losses way more than the victories.
Yeah.
So,
yeah. And it helps you learn.
It does. It's part of growth. It's part of growth. And I think you mentioned in the book, the way you put it was when you do get that feedback, even if it does feel confrontational, what they're telling you is, I care about you and I'm invested in you and I want you to be better.
That's right. And that goes back to the thing of the editor I just described. So there's something about that emotional relationship that you have with people. Now, sometimes you're going to get really negative feedback from someone who doesn't like you at all. And then you've got to figure out what you're going to do with it because there's probably some truth in it. But in general, when you think about receiving or giving feedback, what I have found is that if you approach it or are approached with this feeling of, I really see you and care about you, you can give that feedback, which is why as a manager, because we're talking about managers, if you have a person on your team that you can't do that with, you can't with love, give them that hard feedback, then that tells you that maybe they're not the right person for your team because you don't care enough for them to grow.
Oh, that's good. I like that. I'll have to keep that in mind. Luckily, I like all the people on my team, so it's good.
They're happy too.
So I was going to ask you about, your personal story of your S-curve, but you actually did it in the book. I loved how you use an example of how even the expert like yourself can maybe try to skip a step because you get excited. And you talked about helping your friend with launching a new business. I think it was a magazine, and how you kind of skip the whole exploration phase and it cost you.
You think? Let me tell the story.
In many ways, please.
Let me tell the story. Okay. So I had been working on Wall Street and I was feeling a little invincible because I'd been pretty successful. And I also have a little bit of this isn't a negative thing. This is actually a really positive thing about myself, where when people share their dreams with me, I just get really excited. Like I am like Pavlov's dog. I just am like, what is your dream? This is amazing. Let's make it happen. And so this is one of those experiences where this woman had come to us and said, I've got this idea for this magazine. I was like, this is a good idea. Let's help you. Um, that's all good. What wasn't good, and to your point of like skipping right over the explorer and the collector phase, is I didn't do my due diligence on her. But perhaps more importantly, I didn't bring in a lawyer to put in a contract. I allowed, even though my husband and I were putting in most of the money, I allowed her to have control of the business. I mean, such foolish things. And my husband, as we're moving along, this is like, this isn't a good idea. This isn't a good idea. And I sort of in this bullheaded way proceeded. And because I was working on Wall Street and making more money at the time, I thought, well, of course I had the prerogative to do that. And then it went completely south. She decided that she just wanted to shut down the magazine, and she could because she had control. And so fortunately, my husband and I are still married. He did forgive me, which I'm grateful for. But it was a really important lesson for both of us of not only for him to be more willing to tell me what he's thinking, but for me to be willing to listen, to not being addicted to being right. And then back to the launch point of the S curve is you've got to do your due diligence. And so one of the things I say to people now, I was just having a conversation with someone today that we're going to do a project together. And I said, and then we're going to put together the agreement, because we just have to do that, because that's just what we need to do. It's not that I don't like you and I don't trust you and you don't like me and don't trust me. It's just that it's good process to have an agreement in writing, because it forces us to think through what we think. And then it also protects us because things could change.
They can. And I think you lost a friend in that along with some money. So it's a big lesson. Mm-hmm. And I appreciate the fact you were that open and honest and told the story in the book. I appreciated that as well.
But you know what, Clint? I wasn't going to. That editor that I told you about that he eviscerates.
Yeah.
She's like, Whitney, you are writing this book like it's so Pollyanna, like you're at the launch point of the curve, then you go to the top of the curve. And she's like, you are not telling any stories about how hard this is. I wouldn't have put that in there, but I had an editor who called me out.
Good for her or him, whoever it was.
Julie. It was Julie Berry.
Okay. Well, you're better off for it.
Earlier. Yeah. She's getting all sorts of shout outs today.
It is. So we've been talking a lot about the explorer. Let's talk for just a minute about the collector. What's that? Who's the collector? Yeah,
the collector is, okay, so you're on this S curve and you said, you know what? I'm not going to get off this island immediately. I got disrupted in here, or I chose to be here. I'm here and I'm pretty sure I want to be here. And I've answered those preliminary questions that I mentioned. But now I need to collect data and I need to decide, am I really going to commit or not? So this is a place where you're going to start doing like that product market fit or person S curve fit. And you're going to start doing some things that are going to just start to test it and test it from so for example, testing could be, I'm here and I'm going to give it my all for the next 3 to 4 months. I'm going to then see how I feel. I'm going to see if I'm gaining traction. So you're just going to collect data. It's going to be qualitative data. It's going to be quantitative data. And then so that you can make a decision. Do I really want to be here? Or do I want to just take what I've learned and move on to something else? But if the collection's actually working, what's going to happen by the end of the collection period, which is amorphous, you're going to start to build momentum and you're going to tip into the sweet spot. And, I told one of the stories in the book about how I was working on this fund, to invest in women. And I stayed in the collector phase way too long. Like I was collecting data and we were not raising money. Like the data was telling me that it didn't make sense, but I was being stubborn. But if you're able to have more of a process around being in these parts of the curve, then you can jump to new S curves faster and you can, save 3 or 4 months, which is a long time if you start adding and aggregating 3 or 4 month periods where you're really should have changed curves and you haven't.
So I want to talk, there's an example of the collector you use in the book. And again, it's always nice to be humbled. No matter how successful you think you get in life and no matter how old you get, there's always somebody who did it faster and better. We have all these lists like 40 under 40 and 30 under 30, but There's a young lady by the name of Michaela Ulmer who might have had her own list, like 2 under 20 or something, right? Talk
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
her.
Yeah, so she was super interesting. So Michaela Ulmer, she is like 3 years old, and she gets stung by a bee. And lots of parents, and probably I would have been that parent, would have been like, "Oh, you poor thing, you got stung by a bee. And then you should be afraid of bees for the rest of your life." Her parents did not do that. They're like, "Okay, you got stung by a bee. You've got to work through this." And so she started studying about bees, and then she started making honey and started to become an entrepreneur. And then she had her mom supporting her, and dad helping her figure out the marketing piece. So, but before she was a teenager, she had gone on to Shark Tank. And so she was, what part of the reason I love that story is that she had people around her who turned what could have been a traumatic experience, which was a traumatic experience, and use it as a tool of creation. And so collecting data from her parents, her neighborhood, enough data, and getting lots of advice on how to go onto Shark Tank and pitch her idea, et cetera, so that she got on to Shark Tank and was successful. It's a great story. But she's rare, right? And I think the thing that to remember is that she had the drive and she had the ambition, and she had an ecosystem around her that made that possible. If she'd had different parents, that wouldn't have happened.
Yeah. And I stole the thunder a little bit, because when you write about it in the book, you don't realize till almost the end of the story, this is a young person. You're like, oh, this is just another success story of somebody who's in their 20s or 30s. And all of a sudden it's like, at the ripe old age of 15, she's on Shark Tank.
Oh, did I write it like that?
Yeah.
Oh,
It's not
I
obvious
did.
at first that
Oh,
she's,
I love that. I
100%.
forgot that I did that.
Yeah. It's like the punchline in the end. You're like, oh, I didn't see that coming.
Oh, yeah. Okay. See, you should have told this story, Clint, not me.
Oh, no.
Yeah.
No, you did a better job.
Wow.
You have all the information.
Yeah. Oh, there
But
are
it was,
lots of good stories. I do love stories for sure. Stories
and
are
they
great.
do a good job. They tell it to me. I'm a story person, so I
Mhm.
remember stories more than I can just remember, just text. And so
Yeah.
I think it did a good job. So I'm a tools guy too, and there was a couple tools that you mentioned, like the action board and the collector's notebook.
Yep.
So what role do they play?
Yeah. So the action board, this is something that I learned from Tara Swart, who's a neuroscientist and a psychologist. Um, and the basis for this is that our brains process images much more quickly, much more powerfully. It bypasses our conscious brain and goes directly to our subconscious. And so as we're thinking about how we want to be different, and we're thinking about what S curves you want to be on and how to get to the top of an S curve, one of the best things you can do is not just have a vision board, but an action board. And the action board is giving you images so that your subconscious goes, okay, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to be. And your brain starts to process it as if you already are that thing, as if you've already done that, because your subconscious doesn't know the difference between a truth and a lie. And so what happens is if you start showing it these images as if you're already this thing, your subconscious mind figures out how to make it true. And so it becomes very, very powerful if we're willing to use images to be able to represent who we want to be, even if we're not that person yet, which I think is so amazing. I remember hearing from Bob Proctor, who was kind of like a human potential before Tony Robbins type of person. He was a wonderful mentor. But the idea is that your subconscious is what's directing what you do. And but your subconscious doesn't know the difference between a truth and a lie. So it's just acting on what you ingested between the ages of 0 and 3. So if you want to change your subconscious, you do it through repetition. But if you show your conscious mind visions, it's going to feed it to your subconscious, and it'll be like, I guess I am a great skier. And then it'll start to figure out how to make you a great skier or a great tennis player or whatever. So that's where the action board comes in. And do not ever, ever underestimate the value of images to be able to help you achieve what you want to achieve.
I'll tell you a quick story. So when I was going to Georgia Tech, it's not a very easy school.
No.
And I was studying electrical engineering. And there were times when I'm like, because I was also an older student. I was in the Navy first. I was 24, 25 when I got there. I'm like, this is just too much. I'm just going to go get a job somewhere. And there was a house on the way home from between where I was living with my brother and school. And I would pass this beautiful house and think, if I ever want to live in a place like this, I got to finish I got to graduate. And I would sit there sometimes in that front of the house, just to your point, that image was burned in my head to the point where one day I got embarrassed because the owners came home and I was in my car at the very end of the driveway by the street. I had to back out so they could get in. But that house is probably a huge reason why I graduated.
That's beautiful. That's a great example.
Yeah.
You had this image of what you wanted to be and how you wanted to be, and so it got you through. Yeah. And you could have said house with 5 bedrooms. That wouldn't have even done anything compared to that visual image, because you could there's a wonderful saying, if you can see it, you could be it. And it's true.
Mm-hmm. And semantics matter. And you actually talk in the book, there's a difference between I run and I'm a runner. Can you elaborate a bit?
I would love to elaborate on that. So I love this stuff so much. So it's based on the work of Gregory Walton, who wrote a paper called Psychologically Precise Interventions. At the time, he was a professor at Stanford. He probably still is. And he talked about the power of our words. So remember, I was talking about your subconscious versus your conscious mind. You use your conscious mind to reprogram your subconscious mind. And so what he did is he found that when people used nouns instead of verbs, they could reprogram themselves. So if they would say, I run, that's a verb for everybody who doesn't remember their English. And I am a runner, which is a noun. And what they found, they were talking about voting and voters, that they increased the voter turnout percentage significantly, like by 13 percentage points. And the reason that happened is it shifted people's identity. So if you say I run versus I am a runner, I start to believe, this goes back to those images that we were just describing. I am a runner. Well, what does a runner do? And it starts telling your body and your mind that you need to be doing things that runners do. And so it moves you and impels you to action in a way that the I run does not. Also, I do think it's interesting if you look at both Deepak Chopra talks about this. So I think it's the Hindu tradition, and also there's a phrase, Hosam, I think that's how you pronounce it, which is I am. And then also in the Christian tradition, you think about the words I am, it's another name for Jesus. And so you're evoking this tremendous creative power. So you can use it from an academic perspective, but there's also from a faith or spiritual perspective. Those words I am are incredibly powerful and creative in terms of, you take those images and those words, and that starts that self-talk, and those technicolor pictures start to really give you that momentum and ability to visualize yourself already at the top of the curve. So of course you'll get there.
I love that. I think it does, because I am a runner means you also run. When I run doesn't mean runner. I can run because I'm being chased by a dog. I'm not a runner. I'm just running. So
that's good. I like that.
You mentioned the word autonomy earlier, and I know this is a different phase of the S-curve, but there's a story about the Scorpio SUV, and they were doing a collaboration. I think it was an Indian company doing a collaboration with Ford, and Ford basically said, no, you guys have the idea, you go do it. And it was a huge success because they were given the autonomy to do it.
Yeah, I thought that was such a great example of this. So one of the things that you talk about, or you think about when you're in the sweet spot of the curve, what's happening when you're in the sweet spot of the curve? And I actually used an acronym of CAR. You're feeling competent, you're feeling autonomous, and you're feeling related or connected to what you're doing. And so this sense of autonomy in the story of Ford is that they were in India, and it was Mahindra. And they had built up all these plans for the Scorpio, and they said to Ford, we want you to build it. And Ford basically said, no, we're not going to build it. You're going to build it. And so there was that. And at first they were like, wait, what? Why? Almost like, why do they want us to do this? But by their saying, no, this is your design. This is your car. This is yours. There was a sense of ownership and a sense of like, this is my agency, this is my country, this is my car. And they treated it differently than they would have if they were manufacturing a car from another country. And so one of the things you do feel when you're in the sweet spot of the curve, and it's one of the ways you asked me earlier, how do I know when I'm in the sweet spot? Well, because you're feeling a sense of competence. Like, I know what I'm doing and I feel good doing this. You feel a sense of autonomy, like, I'm in control here. Like I feel like I have power over or power in this situation. And you also feel related in the sense of you feel connected to the work that you're doing, whatever it is, and you also feel connected to the people that you're doing that work with. And so that's one of the ways that you can know that you're in the sweet spot. But again, the power around the autonomy and that car in India was that no, no, it's yours. And so act like it's yours.
And if we do it, it's going to look like a Ford. So you need it to be different. The R there was relatedness, and I'm a big team guy. You actually mentioned Zaja Pachulia
Uh-huh.
in that section, who I'm a huge fan of because he played in Atlanta for the Hawks for a while.
Oh, a
By the
long
way, he
time
has
ago
his,
though, right?
yeah,
Yeah.
many years ago. But
Yeah.
he has his own personal S curve. I was thinking about this because while he was with the Hawks, he was a big fashion guy, and since he's retired, he's started multiple restaurants and not sports bars. I mean, real, fancy restaurants. And so he has
Uh-huh.
his own rest curve as a
Yeah.
restaurateur.
Yeah.
So you talk about metamorphs, which
Uh-huh.
we talked earlier. They're like the superheroes, and they need to deliberate about what to focus on to complete their transformation. And you actually end up quoting a previous guest on the podcast, Richard Boyatzis, who says that we should focus on the positive.
Mhm.
So, what is the key for metamorphs to, why do we need to focus on that to complete our transformation?
To focus on the positive.
Yeah.
So this is something that I have been thinking a lot about recently because basically whatever you focus on, you get more of, right? So if you focus on the bad things that are happening, your brain will start saying, ooh, bad things are important. So it will start filtering for all the bad things that are happening. If you focus on the positive things that are happening, your brain will say, oh, positive things are important. I need to start filtering for positive things. And so if you think about trying to build momentum along an S curve or in life in general, whatever you focus on or pay attention to, that's what you're going to get. And so if you can focus on what's working, so that shot worked, that the way I described that phrase worked, the way I interacted with that person worked, all of the things that happened in the course of today, your brain starts to say, that worked. Let me remember that. Let me imprint that on my brain so that I can do more of that. And so that is super powerful. And actually, I've been thinking a lot about that recently because so much of our brain is focused on this negativity bias of scanning for everything that's going wrong. And we can actually get addicted to looking at what's going wrong. And so one of the ways that we can make tremendous progress and actually even have a competitive advantage is the ability to focus on what's working for ourselves personally, for the people around us, and even within our organizations.
There's a Tiger Woods story that comes to mind that I think states that as well. And basically Tiger works on, or he worked on the things he was really good at, because he said, I can make changes. He's working on something I'm bad at. It's incremental. I mean, it's so small, infinitesimal what I can actually do. But if I work on what I'm already good at, I can get so much better. And to me,
Yes.
that's like focusing on the positive and not so much the
Yeah.
negative.
Yeah, exactly. And then just building on that from a neuroscience perspective, if you think about wherever you've got a lot of neural pathways, which is something that you're good at, then it's a lot easier to have a lot more neural pathways, right? If you've got a lot of trees in an area, a lot of flowers, then they're going to get, by the bees that Michaela Ulmer was raising, not getting stung by, they're going to, pollinate, and you're going to have a lot more flowers and a lot more trees. So Tiger Woods, neural pathways, focus on the positive. That is really the key to making outsized progress. Forget focusing and not even obsessing on the things that we don't do well, because we're not going to get better at them. Focus and obsess on all the things that we do well.
So what is the single most important takeaway you want readers and listeners today to grasp from smart growth?
I think one of the most important things I want readers to grasp from smart growth is this, that growth is our default setting, and we're wired to grow. It's a lot easier to grow when you have a map. And the S curve gives you that map of what growth and looks and feels like. And so if you can internalize that map, you're going to be able to move through your launch points faster, enjoy and relish your sweet spots longer, and you're going to move off your mastery points into the launch point of a new curve faster. And so I would want your listeners to really understand that this is a tremendously useful tool to help them feel more productive, more useful, and and actually just have more joy in life generally because they're going to be in a perpetual state of growth.
I like that. I like the map analogy as well, because I think you mentioned a couple of people in the book who wanted to become pilots, fly. And then you talked about becoming the runner that you are now, but you add just a few seconds each time to your run, as opposed to these small bites that are achievable, as opposed to this, I'm going to double it every day from 1 mile to 2 miles to 3 miles. You made smaller incremental steps, which is also, I think, the map you're talking about.
Mm-hmm.
So as I wrap, I'm going to ask you 3 questions that I ask up all my guests. The first one, they're really easy, quick questions. Are there any leadership principles that speak to you personally and guide your day-to-day behaviors?
Yes. This is something that I learned. I don't know if you're going to call this a principle, but it's what came to mind. So this is what I'm going with. So something that I learned from Clayton Christensen is don't separate the secular from the spiritual, which is, some people might say, be your authentic self. But basically, bring everything that you have from your academic learning to your whole being of who you are, bring all of that to your work and the work that you do.
Second question is, what's the best piece of advice you ever been given?
This is a quote, but it's still advice. That the joy we feel has very little to do with the circumstances of our lives, and back to the Boyatzis quote, and everything to do with the focus of our lives.
I love it. And finally, what is the best book or article you read recently, and what was the key takeaway?
Okay. It's fiction. I am
love it.
reading these books. I'll give you 2. One is I read the Louise Penny series, which is like they're kind of cozy murder mysteries. She's an amazing author. She's Canadian. And they're like 18 books, so it's fantastic. And then the other one is The Unselected Journals of Emma M. Lyon. And it's kind of a Jane Austen kind of book, but she's delightful and funny and clever. And who doesn't need a great rom-com in their life?
We all do, for sure. Well, Whitney, this has really been great. If people want to learn more about you, engage with you, how can they do that?
I think the best way to engage with me, obviously, on LinkedIn. So I'm on LinkedIn, and you can email me at wj@whitneyjohnson.com. And if you would like a copy of Smart Growth, tell me what you've learned from this podcast with Clint. Give me your address and I will send you a book.
Wow, that's quite the offer. Thank you for that.
Yep.
So
You're
I really appreciate you
too, Clint.
Well, I think I've learned a bit.
Yeah, a little.
I really appreciate your time today, Whitney. Thanks so much for the conversation.
Thanks for having me.